The devastating aftermath of the bombs in Brussels almost 2 weeks ago. It's been revealed that the attackers had also been watching Belgium's nuclear facilities, raising fresh fears as world leaders attend the Nuclear Security Summit in Washington, D.C. So how great is the risk of violent groups building a dirty bomb? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Martine Dennis. Now, the threat of nuclear terrorism has long been with us, but the activities of those involved in the Brussels attacks have highlighted the urgent need to make the world's supply of fissile material secure. The White House reckons that around 2,000 metric tons of this highly dangerous stuff is out there in both civilian and military programmes. It's not just used in weapons of war. Highly enriched uranium and separated plutonium are used to generate power, and they're widely used in medicine. Early on in his presidency, Barack Obama highlighted the risk of nuclear terrorism. He described it as the most immediate and extreme threat to global security. So he launched a series of nuclear security summits. This is the fourth one, and of course, the last of his time in office. So, fears of an attack with a dirty bomb resurfaced last week when it emerged that two of the Brussels attackers had been monitoring a nuclear researcher in Belgium. Officials suspect they may have been trying to obtain nuclear material to make an improvised device. There are also concerns about rogue nations like North Korea. In recent months, Pyongyang says it's carried out a hydrogen bomb test and repeatedly test-fired missiles. The latest missile launch came on Thursday as leaders gathered for the latest Washington summit. Well, despite their differences, the US and China have agreed to work together to try to prevent North Korea from testing more missiles. While North Korea's precise nuclear capabilities are unclear at this point, we do know that it's one of 9 countries in the world that currently has nuclear weapons. Now, together, these countries have almost 16,000 nuclear warheads, and more than 90% of those are held by just the United States and Russia. But when it comes to security, world leaders are most concerned about the 4% of highly enriched uranium, or HEU, that's held in so-called civilian stockpiles around the world. It's for use in hospitals and power reactors. And as we mentioned, President Obama has made removal of these stockpiles a priority of his presidency. Nearly 3,000 kilograms of civilian HEU has now been removed since he moved into the White House. And 14 countries have managed to completely eliminate their civilian nuclear material. Right, let's bring in our guests now for today's discussion. In Washington, D.C., we have Nicholas Roth, Research Associate in the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs at Harvard Kennedy School. In Bath, the UK, via Skype, Hamish de Bretton-Gordon, Chemical Weapons Specialist and Advisor to NGOs in Syria and Iraq. And also in Washington, D.C., we have Takshan Kasienova, who is Associate in Nuclear Policy Program at the Carnegie Endowment. Welcome to you all. Can I start with you, Nicholas, for you to give us an outline of what specifically is the threat to us, the global community, from all this fissile material that seems to be roiling about the planet?
So I think it's important to understand that the consequences of an act of nuclear terrorism would be global. There would be global economic, political repercussions, and that there's a history of terrorist groups looking for trying to acquire nuclear material for a nuclear bomb. And I think in recent years, with the growing threat of the Islamic State, it really highlights, in the recent events in Belgium and around the world, highlights the need for locking down and securing nuclear weapons usable material. Over the last 8 years, essentially, or 7, 8 years, the global community has been engaged in an effort to secure as much nuclear material as possible, and they've made considerable progress over that time. And now, with the last summit upon us, it's important that states agree to commitments that sustain that effort over the long run and continue the process of securing vulnerable nuclear material.
And coming to you, Hamish, with your expertise in the Middle East, what for you is the specific threat? What are the risks involved?
Well, I think particularly, as you say, my expertise is very much Daesh, Islamic State, and their capabilities. They were very quick to demonstrate that they had some fissile material, some uranium, when they took over Mosul University a couple of years ago. And as the ultimate terror organization, they have this morbidly brilliant psychological warfare campaign they wage against all those who oppose them. And they see radiological, nuclear, and chemical weapons and attack as a way to extend that and also to terrorize all those who stand against them. And with what we saw from Brussels last week and what we know that they're doing, particularly in Mosul and Raqqa, developing some of these weapons, that if they possibly can create a dirty bomb or some sort of improvised nuclear device outside the Iraq and Syria region, they certainly will do it. So, the work of this summit is very, very important to limit the movement of any of these fissile materials, and also for security services around the world to interdict Daesh and its various other elements who are trying to create terror in the major cities around the world. So the key thing is, if Islamic State, Daesh could use fissile material to create an attack, they certainly would do it.
And Takshan, we've just been hearing about the specific risks emanating from various groups operating primarily in the Middle East, but obviously in Europe as well. Now, you're coming from a Central Asian background, former Soviet Union. What specifically then has been the experience of where you come from, which is Kazakhstan? Because, of course, there would have been stockpiles, wouldn't there, of fissile material left after the end of the dissolution of the Soviet Union.
The collapse of the Soviet Union created a very dangerous situation throughout the whole former Soviet territory. We were going through a very deep political, economic, societal crisis, and the legacy, the nuclear legacy of the Soviet Union was kind of out there, being vulnerable. Since the early 90s, and with great help from the US government and from the program that was established by Senators Nunn and Lugar, a significant amount of those threats were dealt with. My country, Kazakhstan, has removed all nuclear weapons, for example, from its territory by 1995, and has been engaged in very important programs on reducing nuclear risks, on strengthening nuclear security, on strengthening security of all the facilities. So I would say that compared to the 90s, we're in a much better situation, at least in Kazakhstan. But it doesn't mean that all the risks in the former Soviet Union were eliminated. We've had some cases when material has showed up, for example, in Moldova, and the region of that seems to be from one of the former weapons facilities in Russia. So we're working, but the risk is still out there.
Okay, and Nicholas in Washington, D.C., let's go back to the scenario in Belgium. Belgium, of course, has been highly criticised, hasn't it, for what have been described as lapses in its attitude to national security, but specifically with its lackness, as some would say, with regard to its nuclear facilities, and now the revelation that they were in the crosshairs of those who perpetrated the attacks at the airport and at the metro station. What should Belgium be doing that it isn't doing?
So I think it's important to give credit where credit's due, and actually Belgium's made significant improvements over the last 2 years in its nuclear security. There was a sabotage incident at a nuclear facility in Belgium 2 years ago, and in response, Belgium significantly increased its protection against insider threats at nuclear facilities. And seemingly in response to sort of the increased threat, over the last few months, they've also added additional security guards added armed guards to their nuclear facilities. And I think those two improvements would have been at the top of my list. So Belgium has made important steps. I think it's important also, though, I think there's been a lot of confusion about the reporting out of Belgium. The monitoring of this official at the nuclear facility, we don't know why he was being monitored, but we do know that in order to create a dirty bomb, there are thousands of radiological sources around the world. It wasn't necessary to do this sort of full-time monitoring of this guy in order to access a dirty bomb. But Belgium does have nuclear material still, and I think the more it can do to secure, remove and eliminate its nuclear weapons usable material, the better off we'll be.
And Hamish, I mean, there's an awful lot of regulation, isn't there, surrounding proliferation, use of nuclear weapons, but there seems to be much less when it comes to possession and storage of nuclear material.
Well, that's right, and we've heard already that there are very many commercial and completely normal uses for fissile material and radioactive isotopes. I think we shouldn't damn Belgium too much. Belgium does not have the sophisticated security systems that, say, the UK and the US has, and also with the open borders we've seen in Europe, actually tracking some of these materials and terrorist groups is very much more difficult. And I don't think from a security perspective, we should look at purely the nuclear issue on its own. We must look at it holistically and realise exactly what Islamic State are trying to achieve here. And by doing that, we can in some way make sure that it's reduced. But countries like Belgium require the help of the international community, particularly the US, the UK, and Russia, to bolster their own security services so that they can be at the top of their game. Because the terrorists like Islamic State will look at those countries where they think that they can have an effect, and in this case have looked at Belgium and have gone for that. And it's the responsibility of the rest of the international community to make sure that we give them all the support we can. But as far as regulation goes, I mean, you're absolutely right that it's the commercial uses that are much more difficult to pin down. I mean, purely in somewhere like London, there are probably 20,000 radiological isotopes associated with the medical community that hitherto have not been as policed as much as they should have been, and they, in theory, could be fashioned into some sort of very crude, dirty bomb. And the thing with a dirty bomb, it's a psychological impact that is really damaging rather than the physical piece. And hopefully some of the work that will be done at the summit, well, from yesterday and today, is going to tighten that. But it is the whole community are going to have to work together to do it and not rely on some of the sort of smaller countries who have less resources like Belgium, who are going to be at the forefront because, in effect, they are easier targets for people like Daesh, the Islamic State.
And Takshan, I'm still trying to ascertain exactly what we should fear from the prospect of this fissile material ending up in the hands of violent extremist groups. What exactly can they do with this that would harm all of us?
So we have two specific types of threats. One is that they can obtain nuclear material, which is highly enriched uranium or plutonium, and construct a simple nuclear device. The impact of exploding a nuclear device would be immense. It can, we can have victims in thousands and thousands of people. The territory can become completely unacceptable for life, billions of dollars for cleanup and so on. The second type of threat is that one of these groups might obtain radiological material, which can be used in a dirty bomb radiological device. The impact of exploding such device is much smaller, much more contained. We might not even have fatalities. but it would definitely cause severe economic and societal disruption. And I would just give,
Sorry, I was just going to say, should we assume, therefore, that these kinds of people involved in this kind of activity would have the capabilities, would have the technical know-how?
For a nuclear device, I think we should be kind of careful and not overstate the risk in terms of what type of device they might construct, because it does take an established group with very substantial resources to create a nuclear device. But getting nuclear material is the hardest step in this process. So that's why we're so worried about the nuclear material, because once a group does have nuclear material, and if it's an established group with great resources, then it is a possibility. A much higher risk is, of course, with radiological material. As my colleagues have mentioned, radiological material is used in every single country by many facilities. But here I would also put a little bit of nuance and note that it's not that all radiological material is equally dangerous for a dirty bomb use. There is a special category of high-risk radiological isotopes, and that's what we should be worried about.
And Nicholas, how should we weigh that risk of violent extremist groups getting their hands on the materials to make a dirty bomb? How should we rate that against accidents, of accidental spillage, if you like, of malfunctioning? For instance, Chernobyl, of course, where a reactor malfunctioned spectacularly, and of course that region is experiencing the negative impact from that so many decades down the line.
Well, I think, as was just said, it's important to separate sort of the three types of potential nuclear terrorism events. One is this an actual nuclear bomb going off, which would be catastrophic at both the local and national and global levels. And the radiological example that we just talked about, there is this other category, and Belgium had this sabotage incident recently at a nuclear reactor, and certainly the impact of sabotage at a nuclear reactor, if it's for instance had a Chernobyl, if it's something like Chernobyl happened, or even Fukushima, what it shows us sort of the global implications, economically, environmentally, in terms of human life. Something going wrong at a nuclear reactor, would have enormous consequences. And I think that's why part of this nuclear security effort really does have to be focused on the preventing sabotage component as well. Nuclear facilities need to have, whether they have nuclear bomb material or whether they're just a nuclear power plant that produces energy with non-bomb material, they need to have strong security that can prevent sabotage or theft.
And Hamish, going back to the summit, the fourth summit, and as far as we're aware at this point, the last summit, certainly the last, obviously under an Obama presidency. Why are so many leaders involved? We're talking about 50 or so world leaders. So many of them are leaders of non-nuclear countries, like Canada, for instance. Why are they involved?
Well, I think as the other panelists have said, this is a global issue, and accidents or acts of terrorism, will have a global impact. So it's in everybody's responsibility to actually get involved to ensure that we reduce this as much as possible. And I think the agreement between the US and China yesterday to work to limit North Korea's ability to develop its ballistic program, as you've mentioned earlier, and marry it up with the potential hydrogen bomb that they claim that they've created is absolutely key, because North Korea using that sort of weapon could destabilize and affect not just the Far East but the whole globe. So it's great to see that those 50 leaders are there. I think it's very disappointing that Mr. Putin isn't there, because he is an absolute key player in this, and we've seen his influence in Syria and Iraq only over the last few months. And as we've mentioned, a lot of the missing fissile device material actually emanates from Russia and some of the former Soviet countries. So it's absolutely key that Russia plays a key role in this. And I think also the other thing is that, Russia, along with the US and the UK and France, are absolutely atop of the terrorist Daesh's hit list for this. I mean, it is the Chechens within Islamic State who are the real experts in dirty bombs and providing some of the scientists who might be trying to work on an improvised nuclear device. So it is a global responsibility, and that's why it is great to see those 50 leaders there, and very disappointing that Mr. Putin hasn't turned up.
And Takshan, a lot has been made of the progress that has been achieved as a consequence of these summits. As we've said, this is the fourth. What more needs to be done, given what does appear to be a growing threat from extremist groups who wouldn't mind getting their hands on this highly dangerous material?
I think it's extremely the most important task for right now, today, with the final nuclear security summit, is for the leaders of these countries that are members of the nuclear security summit and those outside of the summit process itself to maintain the momentum. Yes, we lose this summit process, we lose this kind of glamour of high-level meetings of presidents getting together, but we should still continue to pay high-level attention. I think what we as experts are waiting to see as an outcome from today is very strong commitment of regular meetings. We don't know yet exact shape or format, but I think carrying out this momentum and not congratulating ourselves and saying everything is done, it was good to see everybody, let's go back home. I think, yes, the leaders realizing that the job is not finished and that some sort of mechanism should be put in place for the countries to continue working on these issues.
And Nicholas, so everyone seems to agree that security arrangements have improved significantly, haven't they, since the first summit? What is required specifically? Because a legal framework, it would appear, is what's needed then to monitor and regulate the existence of this material.
Well, I think certainly a legal framework would help support strengthening of nuclear security around the globe, and having binding specific commitments on what levels of security are needed would also be helpful. But I think it's also important to recognize that that might be a tough lift for a lot of countries, and there are a lot of things we can do without a legal framework. Countries can continue consolidating the amount of nuclear material. Countries can continue to eliminate nuclear material from their soil. They can continue to make specific commitments to enhancing security at their nuclear facilities. And I think, as the other panelists have said, that strengthening cooperation and transparency, sharing of best practices, learning from one another, and maybe most importantly, the United States and Russia, as the two countries with the most nuclear material, and particularly Russia with the most nuclear weapons and the most nuclear material in hundreds of facilities, their leadership on this issue is critical to continuing a strong effort to enhance nuclear security.
And Hamish, last word to you. How worried are you about security arrangements in a country like Pakistan, for instance, which is quite volatile and, of course, has nuclear weapons?
I think this is an absolute key issue. We've talked a lot about Daesh, Islamic State, and their desire to use these type of weapons, and we've talked about the P5 and the other key nuclear parties tightening up their security measures, which I think they're doing. But they're in countries like North Korea and Pakistan, who appear to be building some more sort of tactical nuclear missiles, weapons, smaller weapons to use on the battlefield. We know the challenges that are happening just across the border in Afghanistan with the Taliban, and of course also within Pakistan's borders. And I think I'll just reiterate what the other guys have said is, this is a global effort. And, globally, particularly led by the P5, we should be supporting countries like Pakistan and helping them, because they don't necessarily have the wherewithal to provide that watertight security that we're required to ensure that proliferation of tactical nuclear weapons from, say, Pakistan, or highly enriched uranium from Russia reach the hands of terrorist groups like Islamic State.
Hamish de Bretton-Gordon, Takshan Kasianeva and Nicholas Roth, thank you all very much indeed. Really interesting conversation. Thanks a lot for taking part in Inside Story. And of course, thank you for watching. You can see the programme again anytime you like by going to the website, aljazeera.com. For more discussion, you can go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. But from me, Martine Dennis, and the whole team, it's bye for now.